Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest Andrew Sillen, who's here to share with us his new book, Kidnapped at Sea: The Civil War Voyage of David Henry White. So have you heard about the Civil War myth that's been exposed? Well, today's guest is going to share with us just that. So Dr. Andrew Sillen is a visiting research scholar in the Department of Anthropology at Rutgers University. He was formerly a professor of paleoanthropology and the founding director of development at the University of Cape Town and the vice president of institutional advancement at Brooklyn College. So welcome to the show, Dr. Andrew Sillen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I mean, what a profound read. Can you share a little bit about what even inspired you to write this book?
Well, I was living in South Africa from 1985 to 2001, 16 years, while I had the opportunity to have a front row seat to the transition from apartheid to democracy. And in my early years there, around 1987, I happened to walk into a cultural history museum in downtown Cape Town, and I was stumbled across this giant glass case with a huge Confederacy battle ensign. And I said to myself, what is a Confederate battle ensign doing in Cape Town? I was an archaeologist. I'm a prehistorian, not a historian. And I was struck that this artifact looked distinctly out of place and out of time. I was trained as an archaeologist to look at artifacts in their context. And this seemed to me out of context. And as one of the few Americans living in South Africa at the time, I kind of felt it was almost a personal responsibility to learn more about it. And I discovered that it was there because a Confederate commerce raider called the Alabama had stopped in Table Bay in 1863 and had received a raucous welcome from the local population, British population, that was very sympathetic to the Confederacy. And in one of the numerous parties for the captain, Raphael Semmes of that vessel, he gave the flag to a ship chandler, and that found its way into the national collections. But my fascination with it really began a 30-year project. Started out as kind of a hobby, and intermittently, while I had day jobs, I would continue to research about the Alabama. And along the way, I discovered the story of David Henry White, who was a free black sailor from Lewis, Delaware, on a Philadelphia-based packet ship called the Tonawanda that had been going from Philadelphia to Liverpool. And this young man was captured when the Alabama took the Tonawanda on October 9th, 1862. And White was kidnapped and enslaved and remained on the Alabama for over 600 days until his demise in the Battle of Cherbourg on June 19th, 1864.
What a remarkable piece of history you've uncovered. I would love for you to share with our audiences a little bit more about how David Henry White has been portrayed in history and where that came from.
That's a really interesting question because he's a good example of the fate of illiterate people who leave no written record of their thoughts and their existence. What we know about White is from very, very limited documentary evidence, but what there is very important because it is a forensic record that proves that everything that was written about White was false and, in fact, could be best characterized as lies. So how do we know about White? In the first instance, we know what Raphael Semmes, the man who kidnapped him, wrote about him. And that was established in an 1869 memoir of the Civil War that Semmes had written as part of what fairly well known by historians as lost cause literature. That is a sort of reinvention of the Civil War's purpose as one that was kind of honorable effort to avoid domination from the North, rather than a frank and open defense of slavery. This is Southern states seceded in order to defend slavery, and Semmes was a powerful advocate for slavery. And in his 1869 memoir, he defended the South, he defended slavery, reinvented the war's purpose. He articulated a trope that had long existed well before the Civil War, throughout the antebellum period, during the Civil War, in the post-Civil War period, right up to the 1940s, in the movie your listeners will know, Gone with the Wind. And this is the trope of the sort of happy, content slave, perfectly comfortable in servitude, whose interests were perfectly aligned with that of their masters. And Semmes describes White in exactly these terms. He describes him as an individual whose condition was considerably bettered when he took him from the Tonawanda, and who was content and happy in servitude and served all the officers and remained loyal to the Confederacy right up until the moment that he drowned in the final Battle of Cherbourg, when the U.S. Navy finally caught up with the Alabama. So what we know about White conventionally in histories of the Alabama is what Semmes and his first officers wrote about him. We only have this kind of superabundance of words from white enslavers. We have no idea what White thought or what his story would have been had he had the opportunity to tell us or to write it down. So in my seeking to find out more about White, of course, it was a challenge, and I never could write about or infer what White thought, but there was an awful lot to say about what White experienced. And there was also the forensic opportunity to look in the archives to find out what we could about White. And what I discovered in the archives of the Pennsylvania Historical Society were the manifests of the ship from which he was kidnapped. And those manifests, and by the way, the log of the captain of the Tonawanda, all prove that White was a free Black cook who earned a salary of $15 a month, which wasn't bad pay at the time. When Semmes wrote his memoir, he lied about it. He said that White was a slave, that he in fact had liberated. He turned the story upside down. And he also said that his condition was considerably bettered. Well, his condition was bettered with a reduction in salary and a demotion, and so on. To the extent that one can find documentary evidence, it appears that almost everything Semmes had to say about White was untrue. So this is the way that I constructed the book. I sought out primary documents. Studying the history or the biography of the disempowered has been described as kind of staring into a well. We have a couple of key facts like ripples on the surface, and it's very hard to figure out what's going on down there. But if you think of the mind as kind of a vessel, I realized that I didn't know what was in the vessel, but I could describe the walls of the vessel or the mold from which the vessel was made. I could describe White's experiences and the forces acting upon him. And that is the approach I took in this book.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Andrew Sillen in regards to his new book, Kidnapped at Sea. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Mary Ann. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Andrew Sillen, who's here sharing with us his new book, Kidnapped at Sea, The Civil War Voyage of David Henry White. I'm sure when you were doing your research, there was so much that maybe surprised you along the way. What's one piece that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, like most Americans, I had a basic history of the Civil War that I had learned in school. And I was aware, of course, of the horrific carnage that took place on land. The battles at Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg. These were so horrific. 20,000 men killed in a single day in some of these battles. And we all are conscious of the fact that those were incredibly important for the outcome of the war. What surprised me and what I learned is that there was also an international dimension to the war that was not as horrific in terms of carnage, but was perhaps just as important in terms of the outcome of the war, because the war had turned into one of attrition. It was not unlike the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, where what really mattered at the end of the day was how the rest of the world was going to engage with the South and the North. And it was by no means clear that France and England would not recognize the Confederacy. And so the diplomatic imbroglios that were going on all over the world during the course of the Civil War, I think has been understudied. And the voyage of the Alabama itself was incredibly impactful in the sense that it nearly destroyed Union commerce, international commerce. The Union Navy had to enforce the blockade. It didn't have enough ships to defend the merchant marine. And during the Civil War, the Alabama and 3 or 4 other Confederate raiders had decimated Union commerce. Over half the merchant marine found either were burned, destroyed, or found foreign flags. Insurance rates went up over 500%. The outcome of the battle, the final battle at Cherbourg between the Alabama and the Kearsarge, which finally caught up with it, was part of the turning point of the war, because it was a very symbolic gesture that the North may prevail, and it helped to keep France and England from siding with the Confederacy. All of that was new to me.
That's just remarkable, the far reach that the Civil War had that most people don't even know about. I had no idea until picking up your book, and it really requires us to look at that period in history in a new way.
I believe so. I believe so. And there are important resonances between the rhetoric of Semmes and the rhetoric of modern politicians. There are similar rhetorical tools that are used: lying, mendacity, hysteria, hyperbole. We hear this all the time in the polarized politics of today, and it feels very, very similar to the rhetoric of Semmes and other defenders of the Confederacy.
From your book, it mentions reports in a few newspapers from New York and Philadelphia describing White's kidnapping. Did you find any evidence of a concerted effort to look for White after his kidnapping?
That's a great question. White's kidnapping was immediately reported to the American authorities in Liverpool. That was the first report I could find, the Tonawonda's captain's report. And then when the Tonawanda returned to Philadelphia, yes, there were newspaper reports, first in the Philadelphia papers and then in the New York Herald and the New York Times. And that's as much as I could find. There were none of the the speeches or the marches or the lobbying that would pertain in today's world, partly because the mechanisms of communication were so unformed compared to where they are now. There was no cable across the Atlantic, and communication was as slow as the fastest boat, about 2 weeks. So it was hard for news to travel. But once the news came to the States, I could find no lobbying on White's behalf. That's not to say it didn't exist, and it's also not to say that the news didn't travel to his family in Delaware, but I could find no record of it. And since his family was illiterate, it could be that there is no record of it. There might be in the lore of particular families that have been passed down through generations, but I believe that would be a project for another researcher.
Well, that in itself would be quite an undertaking.
These big projects are never finished, they're only abandoned.
Especially diving into history the way that you've done. So much turmoil was caused by the Alabama. Can you share with us its military significance to the Civil War?
Well, first of all, it drew over 19 ships off the blockade, Union ships off the blockade. So that was one very practical impact. Number two, it seriously damaged Union commerce. Number three, it showed the world that the Confederacy had belligerent capacity and was therefore worthy of paying attention to, because Confederacy might actually win the war. At least that was the case up until 1863. And the greater significance, practical significance, is that when the Alabama was finally vanquished on June 19th, 1864, an interesting day of the year, by the way, that was such a morale boost for the North and a gut punch to the South. It was one of the things that ensured Lincoln's reelection. Lincoln had been in a tough reelection campaign in 1864 against George McClellan, and it was no means clear that Lincoln would win. But the Alabama's defeat was one of the great moments of the Civil War that boosted morality and helped Lincoln to get reelected.
I'm sure in writing this book, there's so much that didn't make it in the book because, of course, it would be quite a massive undertaking if it did.
Right.
Is there something that as they say, kind of made the cutting room floor, but not quite in the book, that is a piece of history you found fascinating?
There are a lot of things. I think anybody who writes history has to make decisions about what to include and what not to include. And this is such a vast project, not so much because there was a lot of information about White, but because to really describe his experience and the pressures upon him required a tremendous amount of information for the reader to be truly informed. And I needed some kind of method to choose what to put in and what to leave out. And I decided that the book had to have White as the central focus. So there were many things about other characters in the story, Semmes, some of the officers on the Alabama, some of the ships involved and so on, that I decided to leave out that might be in a more conventional history if the history was told from the point of view of the conventional great political and societal conflict. I was telling it from the point of view of one disempowered Black teenager. That led me to leave certain things out that might otherwise have been put in. And that is information about the other boats and the other captains. I was really fascinated with the outcome of the Kearsarge, which was the vessel that vanquished the Alabama under Captain John Ancrum Winslow. I talked a lot about Winslow because he's a good counterpoint to Semmes in terms of leadership qualities. I didn't talk about the fate of the Kearsarge, which was such a famous vessel. I mean, we all know about the Monitor and the Merrimac, but who's heard of the Kearsarge? In the 19th century, the Kearsarge was such a famous vessel, had a place of honor in the flotilla that sailed at the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. And that's something that's exciting to me because I live in Brooklyn and I see the Brooklyn Bridge almost every day. And to have the connection to the Kearsarge in the story was quite exciting for me. But then I thought, well, if I put that in, then I've got to also write about Winslow and his fate, which was kind of interesting because in the Mexican War, he railed against the Commodores and their poor decision-making. And ironically, he ended up being rewarded with the position of Commodore of the Pacific Squadron. So, there are all kinds of facts about relatively peripheral figures and objects that I could have included. And I decided to leave that out because I wanted the focus to be squarely on White. And I didn't want the book to have a whole lot of, tales about this happened to that, and this happened to that, this has happened to that. I wanted the reader to focus on White. That was my focus, and I left it that way.
Well, we're so glad that you did. What a profound book. Andrew, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about Kidnapped at Sea and be part of your community?
Oh, thank you. Well, there's a Facebook page, Kidnapped at Sea Book. There's also kidnappedatsea.com, one word, and that will have links to retailers. And I'm going to be posting regular updates on both of those sites.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
I really appreciate your having me, and thank you so much for your kind words.
Well, thank you, Dr. Andrew Sillen. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Kidnapped at Sea. You can also learn more about this book at kidnappedatsea.com, and this book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.